treat to be able to share Hank Pander's exhibition, The Ordeal, with you today. I became familiar with his work about 20 years ago as a young student at Marylandhurst, and it's just really wonderful to have his work come to the campus community, and especially to get to hear him talk today. For those of you that are just being introduced to Hank's work, he is a formerly trained Dutch painter. He has had a distinguished career as an artist here in the Portland area. His work has been celebrated and recognized by many institutions, of which I would like to mention one. The first is the Regional Arts and Culture Council. He's also been recognized by a State of the Oregon Governor's Award for the Arts and a Master's Fellowship in Painting from the Oregon Arts Commission. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Hank Pander today to speak about his work, and there'll be an opportunity at the end if you'd like to ask any questions. So thank you very much for coming.
Well, good afternoon. I'm just in an enormous audience. So I have to sort of collect myself here a bit. But it's just really great to have the exhibition in this really beautiful room.
Just in case you would like.
Pardon?
If you would like a microphone, then you can have
Yeah,
one.
maybe that would help. Yeah, because I hate to yell. But it's my pleasure. I've never been here, and I've never been in this space, and so to see my paintings so beautifully displayed out here is a really great pleasure, and I feel very honored that I'm allowed to have an exhibition at this, really beautiful campus. I also don't really, over the last number of years, I've had very little, oh my God. Don't do this.
Spam.
Jody, where are you? Sorry. So that threw me off a bit. So yeah, it's really wonderful to have this exhibition here in this space. I don't really know this space. And it's just really great to see these paintings up. These paintings are not really new, but they are relatively recent paintings, and I've selected them in such a way that they would have some sort of cohesion to them, so they make some sort of sense as an exhibition. And since it's also a very small group of paintings, there's a certain amount of intensity to see these works together because they reinforce one another. And I've selected them for that very purpose, so that they, in a sense, are kind of a story towards one another. And they have a lot to do with my life here and my recent experiences in the United States. I'm originally from, as you probably know, originally from the Netherlands, and I came here in the mid-60s as a part-time teacher at the Museum Art School. However, I was married to a young American artist who was from Portland, and the circumstances got such that we had his children here. The marriage sort of collapsed in a way, and so there was really no way for me to really easily go back to the Netherlands, and at the same time I'd sort of started something in this huge country which was so unlike anything I'd ever seen where I grew up. So it also was extremely compelling to be here. And so I ended up staying here for far longer than I had planned, and I'm still here. So the result of it has been that I've always been, I studied at the Rijksacademie voor Beeldende Kunsten in Amsterdam. I grew up in the art world. My father was a well-known illustrator in the Netherlands. I lived in Amsterdam for many years as a, well-known, successful student, and I really loved being a Dutch artist. I really loved the Netherlands. I really liked Dutch art. I really liked the painters around me, and I really was happy with my life in Amsterdam. However, I was at a time in my life from, if I'm going to be a Dutch artist, there's a big world out there. I should sort of find out a little bit more about where I am before I settle down here in the Netherlands. And so, out of all the countries in the world I could imagine at the time in the 60s, I thought it would be the most interesting place would not necessarily be southern France or Denmark or some beautiful landscape somewhere in the Ardennes, but I thought America, the United States of America, that sort of has something about what the future would look like. That's sort of the idea about what's going to happen. So I thought maybe as a contemporary artist I should spend some time in the United States. And so I started sort of looking at in the Netherlands I had friends at the academy who were like UNESCO students, and some of them were Americans. And so I developed friendships with young United States artists in the Netherlands. It gave a kind of dimension to life there, and interesting people and stuff. And so I developed a sort of slight sense about what America would be like from my point of view of living in this very small, dense country, the Netherlands. And so to make a long story short, I was drawn more towards foreigners and American. I liked speaking English. And so I met in that time a young artist who was originally from Portland, and we developed a relationship. Within the span of that relationship, she became pregnant, and we decided that to be responsible to it, we married. And so all of a sudden, although I wasn't really part of a larger plan, I became the husband of a young American artist who was originally from Portland, Oregon. And so in order for me to be here with her family and sort of be in the United States for a bit, I got to know some artists from Portland in Europe, in Italy. And I ended up with a teaching position here at the Museum Art School in the beginning of the 60s. And once I got here, in a sense, I never really looked back. The life was so different from my life in Holland, and it was so compelling, and it was also right in the middle of the Vietnamese War, that I was sort of sucked out into it. I was sucked into this world, and for me it was also very difficult to say, well, now I'm going to go back to Holland and be a Dutch artist, like do the kind of stuff we always used to do. Somehow the experience of being here in the very beginning affected me profoundly. And so, the life in the 60s, it was turbulent, the marriage fell apart, we had these children and all that. It was extremely difficult and full of turmoil. And I decided, being responsible to my sons also, to stay here in this area. And since my connections were in the Portland area, I decided to stay in Portland and find a studio, and I had a teaching position and stuff. And so gradually I kind of built up an existence here in this area. And I familiarized myself with Northwest art and the American art world and stuff. And in a sense, although in spite of myself, I discovered that I had expanded quite a bit into a realm I was unfamiliar with, and making paintings I had never seen before, in a sense, to being in a whole other art world. At the same time, I've always strongly identified by being not only a Dutch artist, but having a certain set of antecedents in the Netherlands, certain kind of artists who were very influential on me, and I couldn't really find anywhere else either. So I retained my sort of Dutch, 20th century Dutch artist spirit and knowledge, and started applying it to making paintings here, which ended up making them quite different than Northwest art. And so in the context of sort of making paintings which are different from people, and at the same time also reflecting on the experience of living in this country which was in war, I started making paintings about, in a sense, my life, my own life experience as a aware artist of my surroundings, and started making paintings which had a kind of tendency to be history paintings, which had to do with, this is my experience here. These are the kind of things happening around me which affect me. So consequently, a lot of my paintings have been very much about my experience as an immigrant living in this country. So this exhibition, there's a selection out of a large body of work. But since it's a small room, I needed to find a group of paintings which sort of hung together and make some sort of sense about being this immigrant artist, and at the same time being here long enough that I had a kind of felt more about, that I understood more what I was doing, that I had a more clear focus and could take on subjects where I could resolve paintings and stuff. So this group of paintings, although they're not like brand new, they're done over the last number of years, I could select them into an exhibition which would be coherent. And so these works, as they hang in this room here, there's by the door, there's a large painting of a family by the ship outside and clearly in a European landscape. That was the very beginning of me becoming an artist, because it was my father who was an artist in Haarlem. We lived during the hunger winter in Haarlem, in occupied Netherlands, so it was just there was massive starvation, there was an enormous pressure, there was huge flights of aircraft over and bombings, and it was a terrible, terrible, terrible time, and there was a massive famine, so people were dying of hunger. And so we little kids had not enough to eat, and so there was some sort of attempt to send me, at least me and one of my sisters, to the countryside with a ship from a distant family member. So my little sister Gees and I were taken to this ship in the city of Haarlem. Painting is hanging on the wall there. And we got in the ship, and the skipper's wife took one look at us, me and my little sister. I was 7, she was 5, and she said, "Let me look at these kids." I said, "Oh my God, they're covered in lice, and they have scurvy. Get these kids on my ship." So we were basically in such poor shape that we were rejected from being a refuge. And at the same time, it was so traumatic for us also, my sister and I, my parents as well, that my dad said, "You will just stay in Holland, everything will be okay, I'll take care of you." And so we stayed through the hunger winter all the way through until liberation. So that kind of painting sort of set the tone actually for being a young person in an extremely dangerous, violent world, and it was extremely effective in the sense that I could not put that thought away from myself of being a child of war. I've always been aware of the dangerous world in which we live, in which I live, and started looking for these kind of subjects which affected me emotionally since my early life as a young artist had started right in the heart of the Second World War. Though a number of years later, I moved to the United States, and I became aware of the fact that this country was just completely, totally immersed in warfare. And it sort of brought back this echo of like, I remember what war was like. I remember these bombing raids. I remember hunger. I remember that life as we live it is sort of, to some extent, an illusion, that things could change around really quite easily, and things could become very dangerous, as they are for lots of people across the world. And so I started living here, and I started looking at these kind of elements of conflict in the life in the United States. And so somebody's made a sort of a brief selection out of them. I've also tried to sort of find links in current affairs as they link me to here, living here in Oregon, and at the same time linking me to my childhood in the Netherlands. And so behind you is a large painting of a woman underwater. It's an event which happened in the last 10 years, where a ship or an airplane in Southeast Asia vanished, filled with Dutch passengers. There was completely about 260 Dutch people in this plane, and this plane vanished from the earth, and they still don't know what happened, whether it was shot down, whether it was an accident, whether it was deliberate. And so there was sort of a moment there of great emotional power having to do with the kind of world we live in, the dangers of it, my connection with the Netherlands, so many people having this tragedy which happened in Ukraine, for God's sake. So these kind of things, they get into my head, and I thought, this is the kind of times we live in now. I think I will make a painting, see if I can make a painting dealing with those concerns I have, and also painting a plane underwater, and how to imagine the survivors of it. And so it became the kind of a force to make a work which was having to do with me, had to do with the Netherlands, be sort of relevant to the time we live in now, and at the same time, it'd be a subject which would have a historical depth and a kind of richness to it in terms of making a big contemporary narrative painting. The same with the painting to the right there in the corner. It's also a painting of a jet engine. It was a jetliner which was shot down also in around the same period of time over Ukraine. It was shot down by the Russians, and it vanished from the screens and stuff. And this plane was shot down. It had like 260 Dutch people in it, and it was just an incredible tragedy. It was the Russians who shot it down, and just didn't really want to have much to do with it. And it was just an enormous tragedy in the Netherlands, and it also was kind of a world event too. And since I live here, at the same time, this world event connected to me personally, and it connected to my country and my country people and stuff. So as I live here, I find more and more that things happen in the world around me which affect me personally, being an immigrant, living in the United States of America, and the United States itself is continually involved in issues dealing with Europe and conflict and war and stuff. So this kind of theme has been sort of resonating throughout my life out here. I do other things too, but this show actually focuses on it. So the painting in the center is basically the riots in Portland, and the buildings in there are the deconstruction of a freeway section in the center of Portland a number of years ago. And so again, this painting is about refuge, about threat, about conflict, about internal conflict, about issues in the United States itself, and so the unstable kind of world we live in. So these paintings are sort of different times, different places, but they're all in that sense connected. The painting on the right, I had a friend who worked at the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and a number of years ago, he gave me a native skull. And I had, custody of this skull of this person for a number of years. And it came up that this skull should go back to the native people. And so my friend who gave it to me said, well, I would like to have it back. So I thought, well, before it gets back to you, I'd like to paint its portrait. So this painting, although some of these paintings deal with international conflict, this painting also deals with the conflicts within the United States itself and its peoples and what happens within it. So these paintings are all somehow related to living in this time, in this planet, how things sort of largely emotionally affect at least me. And so this painting was painted from life. The skull went back to the reservation and it was ceremoniously buried. The large painting behind me is sort of part of a group of paintings I've done over the years, which are basically still lifes. I grew up in Haarlem, and I grew up also around old Haarlem painters who painted sort of melancholy still lifes out of the tradition of Dutch painting. And my dad painted beautiful still lifes, and there was always some kind of skull in it, or a dead cat, or some kind of reference to the passage of time. And it always, as a kid to me, that always spoke to me and somehow, it touched me somehow. And so I painted oftentimes still lifes in the Netherlands. And when I came here to this country, I discovered this whole countryside in the United States here, Oregon also, is littered with corpses of animals. There was a kind of, seems like a perpetual attack on the animal kingdom, and at the same time it echoed finding rabbit skulls in the dunes near Haarlem, which I painted as a child. And so, as I've been living here, I've been trying to find connections between my upbringing in the Netherlands in a war-torn country and what kind of relationships there are between then and what I find now in the here. And so these links between growing up in Holland, growing up during the war, being a little kid, and at the same time then having all these experiences here, how to bring all that together in terms of a coherent body of work. So this painting here is a big still life. I built it in my studio. It's painted totally from life, and it's part of a series of paintings sort of this kind of scope. They relate to other paintings out of European history. It doesn't exist by itself. There's many paintings that have been done over the centuries deal with these sort of timeless kind of subjects. So this exhibition is not necessarily a local exhibition. It's not necessarily paintings about Portland, Oregon, about Oregon itself, but they have a kind of scope to it about my experience here living in this big foreign country and how things strike me historically. And so that's sort of the root of this work. A lot of the work here is done, just still life too. It's been painted from nature. I have all these skeletons. I paint them, I build the still lifes. And so there's also a lot of recognition of like the moment around me as well. So the drawings are oftentimes preliminary drawings for paintings. Also, they're work standing on their own in a way. But some of these drawings are also studies for some of these paintings. So the whole painting process is that these paintings don't exist all by themselves, but there has oftentimes a very elaborate process ahead of them, like making pen and ink drawings, making watercolors, going out in nature, making nature studies and all. So there's a kind of a basis, a kind of foundation to all this work which hangs here, which have this sort of basement of these drawings and these watercolors. So that's why I put these watercolors in here, because there's oftentimes a direct step between one and the other, but there's also steps between the drawings and watercolors and sketchbooks and sort of, so these works, they sort of develop out of a larger sort of process. So there are very few paintings here, but they have behind them a very large body of work. So any questions? Except getting dry mouth.
Well, I recall, I'm happy about this, but 9/11, you went back to ground zero and took photos and brought the body of paintings from that.
Mm-hmm.
Where are those? What became of that body?
Yeah, the paintings, mostly, sadly, I have to admit that most of my work is in storage. Because the people who buy art out in this community and in this country, they have a different notion about what contemporary art is supposed to look like. And all the things are it's scary, I don't want to hang this on my wall, I love your work, but so on and so forth. So I'm kind of the victim oftentimes of a great little, I think, of ignorance. So, anyway, how this,
Question.
yeah?
Your work is really big, and I'm curious, I know that you have a great history of doing theatrical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And did doing big theatrical things happen first, or did the big paintings happen after, or have you just always gone big?
Well, these paintings here are sort of part of it, like a program. These are all not being done together. There's sometimes a year between them or so. So they're oftentimes development of a drawing or a watercolor, an idea, or a political event happening, which sort of I find interesting enough to do a painting about. And so, but my interests themselves show themselves in the body of work. So there's a cohesion between them. But oftentimes these works I've done totally for their own purpose. Is that enough of an answer?
Yes.
Yeah?
I moved to this state in Iowa in 1996, and the first time I saw one of your paintings was over at the Portland Art Museum, and it was a picture of the new Carissa with a helicopter. It was an immense painting, and filled the entire wall inside the building there.
It's the size of this painting.
It just seems
Painting.
so large.
It's the same size.
Same size,
Yeah.
but it just seems so much larger than this.
Yeah, no, it's just an illusion.
Where has that painting gone off to? Do you know where it's at now, or
Pardon?
where is that painting now?
I think that painting belongs to the Portland Art Museum.
work was in storage.
Pardon?
You had alluded to work being in storage because of the content that it explored, and it hadn't necessarily went to I think it's the microphone. I was just wondering, can you talk about navigating a profession in the arts and having relationships with the galleries in addition to being your own marketer of work? Because I think that we have a lot of students here that are interested in exploring arts, and it's an important topic to think about. Not only making art, but getting your work out there and getting it supported.
Are there any students here?
Yes.
Good luck. You have to sort of also, you have to kind of follow your own path in a sense. There's always an enormous amount of voices and pressures and economic pressures and, teachers and peers, all that. There's an enormous amount of pressure to perform in a particular kind of way, but I think that if you want to be an artist, you have to kind of really follow your own path in a sense and do it seriously and intensely and sort of ignore all this voice. It's been open to ideas and stuff, but you have to also be kind of stand strong enough on your feet from, I don't care what these people think. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it as well as I can. So that is difficult because society doesn't particularly appreciate that attitude. But if you want to be a serious artist, then I think you should be serious about it.
I have a question, Hank. I was looking at the book that came out from David Hull from the Salem Art Museum.
Pardon?
I was looking at the book that came out with David Hull from the Salem Art Museum.
Yeah.
And in it was paintings of the instrument panels of airplanes. Those confused me. What was the impetus behind those paintings?
Pardon?
What was the reason for those paintings?
Well, it also goes back very far. When I was a child, in the time when that event happened, the skies were filled with bombers flying out of Germany towards the Netherlands and over the Netherlands to bomb the hell out of Britain. And so there was this fast bombing, and there was this enormous defenses and stuff. So when I grew up as a young child, I remember these huge waves of planes flying over. There's little songs about it. Und wir fahren gegen England ein. And so as a child, I would look out the window of my bedroom and I see these high-flying planes flying over, and I could hear them. And at the same time, you could see the searchlights sort of scanning the horizon and picking up planes. All of a sudden, you see a little white plane in the sky being tracked by the Nazi searchlights, and it'd be flak being shot at them. I could see that in front of out of my own bedroom window. So the whole idea of these planes flying over, and if you really look at the contemporary life and contemporary warfare, it's all about missiles and airplanes and flying through the sky and being seen or not seen and stuff. So in a sense, in the middle of the 20th century, our time we live in now started then. And when I was a child, I was exposed to the fierceness and the violence of that kind of experience, and be well aware that that kind of thing continues to our day. And so oftentimes I make paintings which refer to it or be like a metaphor about the danger in the sky. So,
I see, thank you.
yeah.
You have a wonderful presence on social media, and we teach a class here on campus called Digital Tools, and it's to help students promote their artwork. Do you do your social media? Do you have a friend or family member help?
Pardon, I don't understand you.
You have a great Facebook page,
Oh, thank you.
and students are always trying to promote their artwork. We have a class here on campus called Digital Tools, and it's to help students recognize how they can get their identity and their artwork out.
Uh-huh.
Who helps you with yours, or do you enjoy the social media, the Facebook?
Good question. I don't feel particularly like I'm particularly skillful at it. I'm well aware of the fact that I'm sort of this foreigner living in Oregon, and if I don't do anything about promoting my work in the contemporary media, I would not be around. You know, these galleries say, "Well, we get in the painter," you know, God. So I have really, it's really important to use like contemporary media in order to survive in this kind of culture.
Well, you do a great job.
So yeah, so I've helped, but it's basically I've been doing it for a number of years, so I have a fairly good sense about how to do it and be kind of consistent about it. And since I'm really quite productive, I always have new work, or work comes back and stuff. So it's always kind of a conversation, which frankly I like. I mean, it also gets you really out of your isolation and be part of the world. So it's been a good thing.
I don't know if I remember this correctly, but didn't you do a series on Vortex and the American Legion when they came to town back in the 70s? Is that correct?
Let me think. That's a long time ago. Well, yeah, I was involved in a theater. I was involved in a storefront. I was sort of, because of the hostility of the art community towards me as an artist, I found myself drifting more and more in the alternative world, which were at least nice to me.
Yeah.
And so, I was young and stuff, and it was interesting. So I found myself also drawn towards installations and happenings and art events and all that. So I was sort of drawn to that particular development in contemporary art. And so consequently, I was also became involved in political events like demonstrations and organizations and stuff. So I had a sort of, not that I was an activist or anything, but I was interested in it as a European immigrant, what's going on here in this country, and what I'm stick on my nose on top of it. I could draw these people right in front of me, like these demonstrations and violence. So I was right in the thick of it. And occasionally I had these letters published in the Netherlands. So it gave a kind of purpose to me being here too, that I could sort of describe these kind of things. What is it like to be an artist, a Dutch artist in the United States of America?
In those times.
So yeah, so anyway, that's kind of what drove me to do a lot of these drawings and stuff. And I had nobody else was doing it either, so I did have a lot of these works published.
I remember. Was this after Montchalin Studio?
Pardon?
After you were in Montchalin?
Yeah, probably, yeah. That was in the 60s, yeah.
We have time for one last question. All right.
You'd have, I would guess, would be a large body of work, really quite beautiful landscapes.
Yeah.
And don't those have a place?
Yeah, I have to be sort of sensible. I went to the Rijksacademie in Amsterdam. I went to this extremely fancy art school, and I had came here with an enormous amount of skills. Things I could just do. I've learned them in school, and I'd like doing them. So I also had to survive here. I live completely exclusively of my work, so I had to sort of be in tune about the kind of things I could do, which the community would respond to. This is Oregon, so beautiful. You do it so nicely. How much is it? So in effect, it has also kind of given me a way to make a living. And frankly, I make one of these big watercolors in an afternoon. So I go on a painting trip and I take 10 of these big pieces of watercolor, and 10 of 2 weeks later I come back and I have a set of these really big landscape of the Columbia River or a forest in southern Oregon and so on and so forth. So I just develop, and if you do that twice a year, you come back with like maybe 20 big watercolors. And it's these kind of pieces, although they take very little of my time, I do have the skills to do them, and they find their way into offices and people's homes and all that. And at times I resent it, that I have to sort of make these kind of quote commercial pieces. At the same time, these big watercolors are exciting to do. They're beautiful. Nobody knows how to do them and stuff. So being out in the American landscape, there's also very rewarding. So I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I wish people had a little bit more sophisticated interests or were more interested in the kind of things I like to do, like these. But at the same time, the Oregon nature and the landscape has basically made it possible for me to stand here and talk to you. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm speechless.